All right, I am going to start. This is about the schema.org blueprints module. I put this tagline, now I added Drupal, because I think we can no longer say CMS in our community. We need to say Drupal CMS. And actually, I don't love the name, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Like even when you're talking in your community, say Drupal CMS and get those two things together, then people have a better understanding. What is Drupal? I added slides to this presentation. The first slide I have is this project I'm going to quantify as it's Drupal adjacent because there's a lot going on in the community at this conference. Like what's happened with recipes is incredible. And I've been watching the trajectory, and at this one conference, the amount of interest, code, and things happening is just skyrocketed. And it does change some of the things you're going to see. But I really want to make a point off the demo. I'm assuming everyone saw the keynote because the keynote had this discussion about wine tours and how to build a website about it, but didn't address this concept that we're going to be talking to machines and you're going to ask, hey, AI, find me a wine tour in Barcelona that I can go to tomorrow afternoon. And it might respond, your name. There are multiple wine tours in Barcelona available for tomorrow. Can I ask you a few questions about your wine preferences? Right now, when I use Alexa or Siri, it doesn't do this really well. It kind of sucks. But I think this is going to change really fast. Apple AI is probably going to be able to do this within a year or two. And it's huge. It means that this is what you're going to get for the first thing of a website. This is going to be more important. I hate to say it to anyone who's a marketer. I don't want to offend them. This might be more important than the website because this is what's going to bring business and drive people to your website. And this already happens in Google on these pages. This is all driven by information pulled from your website, your images, your assets. Google's reading your website and pulling these assets. So I added these slides because that's the goal of this schema.org, is to describe things on your website. And one last thing before I go there, I just want to say one thing about single directory components and the builder, and I'm going to make this point during the presentation, is a single directory component is not identical to data. It takes data, but the quality of that data is equally important to the visual representation that you're getting from a single directory component. And I'm going to start. And the presentation is about going from 0 to 60 with the schema.org blueprints module. And I didn't introduce myself, I'm sorry. My name's Jacob Rockowitz. I want to make your life easier by solving complex problems with simple, well thought out solutions. You can find me at J Rockowitz. I'm from New York, Brooklyn. And we're just going to start, starting your engines, getting started with schema.org. And this is the most simple way for me to describe the relationship of Drupal and schema. You can build anything in Drupal, and schema.org provides a standard for defining anything. So whatever sector you're in, and you want to build an event website or a recipe website, or I work for a hospital, we want to build a hospital website, we can build that in Drupal. You can model that data, but schema.org provides that model in a concrete standard. And that is, schema.org is a collaborative community activity that's been going on for years with a mission to create, maintain, and promote schemas for structured data on the internet, on web pages, and email messages, and beyond. And it's a collaboration of Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo. And I want to emphasize, it's not just for web pages. It's for voice applications. It's for email. All the cool things you see in your Gmail, like little sign-up buttons, those are all being driven by schema.org today. And this is just my example of schema.org of my information. And the key thing I will call out is that, it's given name, additional name, family name. Me from the US, everyone says first name, last name, middle name. And frankly, we need to stop doing that in the US when we do our content models. We need to be universal. We need to be standardized. I'm going to keep going. So the approach that this module is coming from is a schema.org first approach, which leverages schema.org as the foundation for building content models using structured data, which is API first, standardized, and universal. So we're no longer complying with the standard, we're leveraging the standard. And it's honestly, that statement's a direct critique of the meta tag schema.org module. Because that module is you build your whole content model, you do whatever the heck you want, and then you shoehorn that data into the schema.org spec and hope it gets there as close as possible. And there's a lot of limitations. And frankly, you'll see some other benefits from thinking about schema.org first, not trying to meet the standard, but just using the standard. And the Blueprints module is just taking a schema.org first approach for content models in Drupal. And I want to own some good, bad, and ugly. look, we're leveraging a standard. Can become a lot simpler. It's more flexible because you have a standard. You know where you're starting from. The bad is this is a new approach. This is like literally throwing out all your previous thoughts on content models and saying we're adopting one standard. And I think that's really hard for anyone to do. We've been doing it for 20 years on our own. It can be restrictive. That's what standards do. It's definitely different. And the ugly is schema.org is complex. I mean, they're trying to cover everything. They miss things. You have to understand it. Some of the documentation can be a little unclear. Frankly, I'm not going into it, but like Google has their subset of schema that you're going to want to 100% align to, and then schema is much more vast. And yes, it can be constrictive. And what I learned, and this is a lot, like, by the way, this project's a brain dump of mine. I've been working in CMSs for 20 years, so I'm trying to like codify my best practices. And this was the biggest thing, one of the biggest things I got is there's been talk about decision records, ADRs, architecture decision records. And there's a decisions MD file in the module that records all the decisions around this module. And I'm going to go through it, but I want to, one thing, by the way, if you don't adopt the module, there's things to take away. This is something to take away. I personally wish every Drupal project I had joined had something like this, a page to describe everything that's going on here, just so you could read it in an hour and be like, okay, I get what they're doing. So I'm going to introduce you to the module, and there's a clean install. Very similar to Starshot, I'm trying to build the ideal instance of Drupal. So there's a schema.org demo module that's doing Gin theme, and you're going to see a lot of modules installed to make this the ideal user experience. For example, there's the dashboards module as well. The way to get started is always to look for help. And in help, there's a dedicated help module that actually creates a grouping of this. It's kind of an ecosystem of modules. And in here, you can go to the first one, which is bold, and get the lay of the land on what's going on the general features of the core module. And I'm going to go straight into Decisions MD and then just come back here. When I say this, it's just noting all the little decisions. For example, architecture decision records are meant to be one file each, and I just made the decision to keep it in one, like each decision its own file, and I think that's too verbose and complex, and I wanted to put it in one single markdown file. But literally noting, starting with Drupal's coding standards, write tests for all, by the way, this is just a best practice, write tests for all basic functionality, and then when you hit a regression, write a real test. It's easily the best way to get test coverage into your code. Oh, and by the way, I apologize. I will make this bigger. And please, you can call me out if it's too small. And then I'm hinting, you can write great kernel tests. It's one of the best ways to write tests and the fastest, and I'm showing you where the base test is. And then there's a decision that was made that for structured data that's being generated by this module, I'm prefixing with schema underscore, and everything else it sticks to field underscore. And it helps to defines it when you're going through your APIs, what's schema, structured data, and what's field. And I want to emphasize content configuration. Schema's content, fields are generally configuration or custom. And then in the code architecture, I'm namespacing everything. I'm going to scroll down and point out, noting what schema.org types map to what Drupal entity types. So when you get in here, you'll see how we're mapping media goes to media object, and then inside media object, because schema.org is hierarchical, you have image object, video object. And then little things about properties, what properties you use, what's important. And they're just thoughts and ideas. And lastly, little things on just what external libraries are used. But the one I like to note, and I really think this is useful for any project, is I'm noting, just tracking every module that I'm installing. In a one sentence, like, I'm using address to align with schema.org address. And the little star in this is to help just note that we're doing, there's a dedicated submodule to get addresses to align, because you have to take the address field and map it to schema.org's definition of an address. And even as simple as, by the way, this is what we're going to see in Starshot, is a list of modules that are kind of recommended. Like focal point, the idea that anytime you create an image using this module, it'll use focal point automatically. All right. So I'm talking a lot about what's going on here. I'm going to go back. And in the help, there's a lot of submodules. I'm not going to go into the ideas. And by the way, in the decisions record, it says, we're using submodules to break down features so they're easier to maintain and understand. So there's small pieces of code doing little specific things. And, I'm tracking all those modules. And there was even a decision to track nuances about those modules. And this is just a table that's saying which ones have install hooks. It's a hint about installing, uninstalling. Some modules are needed for production, some aren't. The example would be the address module is needed for production because it maps the address field to schema.org's JSON LD specification. So you need that turned on for production. But there's other little modules that you don't need for production because they're generating your content types. And that's where I'm going to start talking about generating content types. There's even a dedicated schema.org reports module, which brings the schema.org spec into Drupal. I used to start with this page, which is schema.org, and start browsing around schema.org to show you the spec. But the reality is the entire spec is being brought into Drupal as a report that you can navigate around. So you could see all the schema.org types, all the different things that are available. And it sometimes helps just to open this up and say, these are the high level things. If you're not very familiar with schema.org, it's pretty well thought out. We want to define people, places, organizations, creative works, which would be anything. And we're going to come back to that. But for a really quick demo, what I like to do is recipe. And I think it's funny that we say the word recipes in many different ways. And I've had conversations that get this confused. A recipe, something you cook. And in this report, I'm also noting references. And I want to emphasize, as one of the challenges with schema, you have to understand it. So I'm tracking all the articles related to schema.org about every type. So if you're an SEO person, this is very useful because it's like anything you're building. So coming back here, I'm just noting some recipes. This is listing everything. So this is a kitchen sink of every single property, completely overwhelming. And I want to emphasize, but it helps to show you there's descriptions, relationships noted, what, a funder can be an organization or a person. But if I go to the bottom, we're going to get little details. And this is the most important one. And I'm going to increase my font so you can see it properly. And you're going to see this in action. So the default properties for a recipe out of the box is, first off, schema.org is hierarchical. It uses inheritance. So a recipe is a creative work that is a how-to, and then you get to a recipe. So all creative works should support translation, so it pulls the in-language field. How-tos have image, name, and step. And frankly, when you get to a recipe, you don't want to use step because they have recipe instructions and ingredients in these properties. And if we want to see it in action, we can go up here and say add schema.org type, and it's going to add it as a content type. And I want to emphasize, we're in the report, but there's lots of ways to do things in Drupal, or I like to do it that way. We're jumped over to this add a schema.org type recipe, and I want to emphasize, really, we're brought over to the content type section, but we have an add schema.org type. And the same way to get there is this starting page. And what's happening is, this is a UI for catch-all for mapping schema.org to a Drupal entity. The first thing it's going to do is create an entity type with a recipe name, description. The description is blank. There's a dedicated module that pulls in schema.org descriptions into your content model, and you can override them. You could type your own descriptions, but the idea is let's leave it blank, and then if it's empty, we're going to grab it from the spec. This is a mapping. It's showing you all the those default properties I was talking about. When it's green, it means the property already exists in your system. If it's yellow, it's going to create it. And if I click here, what it's doing is, this is like a add field form, very basic, where you're just saying the field type, label, description, then machine name, whether it's unlimited or required. If you wanted to, you can go over to here and say show unmapped, and you'll get everything, which is frankly overwhelming, which is why this exists. But if we want, we can go into, you can add new properties. So I'm going to add an alternate name to recipes and just show you how that works. Just hit add new, it's added. If I scroll to the bottom, I'm going to hit save. And this is, by the way, there's a module that does additional mapping. So the spec, schema.org describes things like a recipe, but you're placing it on a web page. So the additional mapping is saying, put this recipe on a web page. And a web page has two really nice fields. It has related link and significant link. And I love schema because it's something I've always created related link fields, and it's actually not appropriate. You want to describe two different aspects of links. If you have a blog post about a person, you're going to link to that person. That's a significant link. If you're going to link to other blog posts that are similar, you're going to use a related link. And these are just examples in that schema.org community where they've thought these things out. So we've got a recipe content type. Let's see it in action. So I'm going to go to add content. And yes, I'm using the type tray module. And frankly, one of the perks of starting with schema is I know everyone's going to use the word recipe, therefore I can add a recipe icon. If someone creates a location, they're going to use place. I can create a little placeholder, like a pinpoint icon. And I click on recipe, and the type tray module comes over here, and we get a nice pristine form that's mapping all of these are schema.org fields, and I'll show you it at the end. It even goes so much as the example would be there's a dedicated schema.org meta tag module that adds meta tags to every content type as they're created and in the ideal way, which is you just want to let people add a couple of keywords and fields. I can come back to meta tags too. There's a schema.org devel module in the experimental namespace that I personally want to be able to demo things and show people dummy content before it's created. So this is literally for developers. It's devel generate before it triggers. So it's pre-filling the form with Latin text. It makes it very easy to smoke test your content type and your architecture because it's just filling out the form. I can hit save. And I get this nice, well-organized front end that could be, frankly, originally I started the project and we were going to decouple. This is data that could be easily decoupled. It's grouped just to have some organization. At the very bottom, adding some blocks. One block, there's a dedicated diagram module because that's the beauty of schema.org. It's not just properties, it's relationships. It's named, structured relationships. I want to emphasize, and I'll come back to it over and over again. Name, structured relationships is huge. In Drupal, we have parent-child. That is not helpful for search engines. They want parent organization, sub-organization, is part, has part. Like, what's the exact relationship? Now, this is pulling in the about, and because it's generated, it's not great, but it's saying, this recipe is about this. I have 2 style guides in here. But this is the data, and I want to emphasize, this is a readable version of schema.org for machines. It's even creating the variations that Google's looking for all your image styles. Google's looking for 3. It has, and by the way, we're on a web page that inside the main entity is a recipe, and we get all this information at the very, broken down exactly perfect for search engine. This is more data than anyone's putting out there to schema.org, like to Google at this point. And recipes is huge. This allows a recipe to appear in Google search on the top. And this is the raw JSON LD at the very bottom. And you can copy and paste it into Google's validator or schema.org's validator. There's no open APIs. If anyone wants to ask that question, you have to manually cut and paste. They don't expose an API to test things. And the benefit of using schema.org first is it also impacts your APIs. So when we get into the JSON API and we scroll down to our fields, and I'm going to try to get to one that's juicy, right here. There's no Drupalisms anymore. We don't, because this is structured data. I don't have field underscore schema underscore exposed in my APIs. I'm not even thinking about it anymore because it's automatic. I know is family friendly is a Boolean value. Nutrition, look how perfectly structured that data is. And I'll just throw out, I like throwing out some modules. This data structure is done using the custom field module, which allows you to, it's basically like field collection for Drupal. It's a lighter weight version of paragraph. So I can say, here's nutrition and here's all the properties I need under nutrition. Okay, that was a crash course on what's going to happen. So let me check time. We're good. I showed you one content type. We're building full solutions, full content architectures. So how do we build a standardized content architecture? There's 2 concepts, and they're in dedicated modules, and one started first, and the first one started was mapping sets, which provide a quick and easy way to set up and test different related schema.org types. And starter kits is a set of schema.org types with additional configuration that sets up and configures an entire working solution which addresses a specific feature set or business requirement. This concept absolutely is similar to recipes initiative in Drupal. The recipes meaning config, actions, and all those things working together. Towards the end, if you're asking questions, we can get into some of the nuances, but frankly, starter kits are going to have to shift over to recipes. So what you're seeing is going to have to be rethought, which I'm frankly fine with. So I'm going to show both concepts. And this just gives us an opportunity to talk about the configuration section. So you can go to configuration schema.org. I'm going to go through some of the tabs and just start with mapping. So we created a recipe content type, and this just lists out all your mappings in your system so you have an understanding of what's going on. So this is the recipe we created, and you'll note that media And that, by the way, that's why I did submodules. When you install the schema.org media module, it looks at your media entities and starts mapping them for you. And a lot of them make sense. And I can even illustrate that. The next tab, which mapping types, is just how we're mapping a Drupal entity type to schema.org. And the media mapping says, okay, if you have audio, it goes to audio object. If you have a document, it goes to the data download. And it's a good opportunity to say you don't need to change any of these settings. These are reasonable defaults. This is how media works in core. I personally, I mean, the problem would be if you create your own video type, which does happen. You might want to create a dedicated YouTube video type. So mapping sets, this is a dedicated module. I'm going to make a statement. I don't actually use this. I only use this when I'm starting out. If someone says, build me a hotel website or something, I will sit down and put a few schema.org types together and just see how they work out of the box. So for example, with podcasts, it will generate a podcast for you. And a podcast is just a relationship. And I want to emphasize the order here is from the very specific entity to the general, because you need to first have an episode that can be placed in a season and a season that could be placed in a series. And if you click up Setup Types, it's going to give you a hint on what's going to happen, what property is going to be created. And what's really important here is it sets up the relationship, episode number and associated media, because if for a podcast, you want audio. And podcast season will have episodes as a relation. By the way, that's a real relationship. And this is very basic. So if I go over the configure tab, it's literally, and by the way, all the configuration is YAML because there's so much going on. It makes it easier instead of building complex UI. It's just saying, hey, create these schema.org types in this order. And there's a pattern here that you will see throughout the module. It's entity type, schema type. Really, it's entity type, bundle, schema type, but we can assume the bundle name will be the lowercase version of the schema.org type. But you know, there's sometimes you want to use multiple schema.org types to create different bundles. But starter kits is where I personally focus most of my energy. They are modules that you go to install, and it scaffolds out an entire content architecture. And I have layout already set up, and I'll come back to it, but I'm going to do the organization because it's the best way to get a quick lay of the land. So it's going to create a person content type. It's going to add these new fields, and just on a note on additional mappings, it's actually wrapping it in a profile page, which is a subtype of web page, and it's basically just saying to search engines, a person's on this page. And it still has the same comment properties that we're used to, related link and significant link. I'm going to hit confirm. An organization is totally worth calling out that it has a relationship, parent suborganization. Frankly, as I demo it, this is my replacement to the book module. I loved the book module because it organized your nodes, but you can use entity references to organize your nodes, and the power here is it's well-defined. It's structured data. It's not just parent-child. Search engines understand your organization tree when you're using this. I'm going to go back to the reports module and really show you one of my favorite JavaScript libraries, and I like simple. So I'm going to go to the relationships tab. And this is just showing you all the relationships of your schema.org types because they're well structured. This is some of the existing stuff I have, but this is what we just created over here. And I can even do some pan and zoom. And so what do we get? We have an organization that can nest in, parent, suborganization. We have people that can join the organization as a member, and it's an inverse of, they call it an inverse of relationship. So a person can be a member of an organization, and an organization can have members. And the plus role, boy, look up that spec. Schema.org type defines a role. That means what type of relationship? Is this person the president of the organization? And then you can have job postings and say who the hiring organization is. And we can quickly, I'm going to do a time check, go in, and I'm going to do this very quick because I think people are starting to see the patterns. I'm going to create an organization. I'm going to actually do Drupal.org as my demo. I'm going to try to publish everything and be smart about it. Hit save. And then inside this organization, we might say we have the Drupal Association. This type is a additional type or subtyping. So schema.org supports subtyping. It's hierarchical. You can add your own types. You can say this is an organization, but this one is a non-for-profit. And I do think there's a non-for-profit subtype, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to save it. Go up. And I didn't publish it, but I think that's okay. But now you start seeing the diagrams working out. So we can go back up to Drupal.org, and we can add a person as a member. I want to emphasize member employee. That's a nice thing about organizations. This allows anything, but I want to, it's an example where some of my notes are organizations have members, but local businesses have employees. Schema.org doesn't really distinguish. They support both properties on an organization. I understand that nuance. But generally, if you're building out architecture, it kind of makes sense. But we're going to do member, and I'll use Dries, and I will pull his last name in. I'm going to publish him. And just a note, like the entity prepopulate module is building all these relationships. That allows us to pass query string parameters that drill into them, into the node. And at the bottom, I am setting this relationship, if I can scroll to it, that he's a member of Drupal.org. And if I hit save, we go to the diagram, we see his relationship here. And by the way, the link's here too. So let's go back up and let's clarify his relationship using a role. I'm gonna hit edit. I love contact points, but I'm not talking about it. Okay, he's the BDFL, Benevolent Discounter for Life. Hit save. And that module that I just did is an entity reference override. It allows you to add a string of text to an entity reference. It's an incredibly awesome module. I'm using it in schema.org, but I can't recommend it enough for other sites. Because when you're building any relationship, if you wanted a custom description for related links, you can do that this way. And it's adding him in as the BDFL in the relationship diagram and even making a note when he's a member of the Drupal.org. I'm going to, in the demo, you can go to job posting, add a job posting, state who the hiring organization. By the way, the hiring organization in that demo, there is a problem with it. There's no inverse of relationship. So when you go and create a job posting, it says, this job posting's for this organization, but out of the box schema is unclear on, I'm an organization, here are my jobs. That has yet to be determined the best way to describe that. I'm going to keep going. Okay. We're getting closer. So I'm going to breeze through this because lots of things are happening with authoring content in Drupal. I'm just going to give you some of my best practices and thoughts while doing this. And I think it's really important. I'm emphasizing structured data, but we do want to address, I started by saying I don't care about marketers, but no, we have to address that and make it easy for them to build things. And I think there are two page building paradigms. I do not strongly feel there is one. You have CK Editor, a simple HTML editor where you just drop assets into it. And then you have complex layout. And I'm using paragraphs with multiple components. And I don't think we should ever forget how important CK Editor is. It's easy. It's a simple document. And I'm going to just kind of highlight that. So I'm going to do a demo. When I say CK Editor, I have a dedicated starter kit called Layout. And it actually starts with a basic content type and an advanced content type. That's one approach. You can also, I think a lot of people do this, is they have one content type called page. You fill out the body field, but if you want to make a complex layout, you go into another tab. Layout Builder is doing this. You put the body field in, then you go to the Layout tab, and you build your complex layout. And when I say basic content, I'm just saying CK Editor. And, ooh, look at that. Give me one fair chance. I think I know what the problem is. There we go. All right, sorry that it's small, but that is a CK Editor bug and not my bug. What I want to emphasize about structured data here is, yes, this is just simple HTML, but we can drop a media asset in here, and I'm going to just illustrate that. I'm going to drop a media asset. And by the way, the preview's not working great. I'm sorry about that. But then I can also drop in the embed content. I'm going to drop in, if I had the job, I'd drop that in, but I'll drop in Dries' profile. I'm going to say it's a teaser, embed that. And then even below this, I might even drop in a quote. And this is a really interesting, this is the embedded content module. There is going to be some implementation. This is already happening in Experience Builder. Taking an SDC and making it like building a UI for it. So this is a way to drop an SDC, a quotation SDC, which is schema.org's name for it, and say this is a quote and spoken by Jake. Now I'll just drop it in. And I'm not even going to go any further. I love CK Editor, but I'm going to hit save. And I've added these elements in. You could see them working. The image is not working as expected, but I do know for sure. And I've been scrolling to the bottom. Those are blocks placed at the bottom, but there's also a dedicated tab to access data. And I'm going to go in, and this is the data that would be exposed. It's extracting the data in your CK editor to schema.org. So they know you have a quote on the page, you have an image object, there's a person sitting in the middle of the page, and then of course it's like this is an about page with all this data. Going to advanced content, I'm using Mercury Editor. If Experience Builder is not there and you need a solution now, Mercury Editor is it. That's a strong opinion. I'm going to stand by it. And I feel like it's so. And the other big perk, if anyone's going Layout Builder Mercury, you don't need a lot of modules. It's paragraphs with a module, and it does all this functionality, and it works. So when you need to move, it's paragraphs. And if you're a real geeky developer, I'm just going to emphasize, this layout's not built with nested paragraphs. It's built with really well-structured data underneath the hood. And what I'm going to illustrate here is, and by the way, this is just, I want to give credit to Mercury Editor for what they've done. These paragraphs are structured data. These are mapping to web content. I can go in, I can quickly edit it, these are all mapping to schema.org fields. They've thought out how to style things, which if you're using layout paragraphs, you can go in and make quick changes. I'm changing some icons and assets. That's my shout out to Mercury Editor. But what's more important for me is this is structured data. No one, I want to be really clear. I've never seen anyone do this in any of the layout builders where underneath the real structured data, when I say that, that means search engines come to these complex pages and understand everything on the page. And if we go to the schema.org JSON LD tab, like this tab, we get our page with our main entity, and to Mercury Editor's credit, it's a very flat list of entities. We don't need to show 3-column layouts. Google could care less. But we can say, I've got web content in English, these are the assets, and it's about this. I'm not including it, but schema.org even includes a spec with your CTAs, an action property that says, what is the action you're hoping someone takes when they click on this link? Are they buying airline tickets? Are they registering for an event? And they use that. That's what's happening, by the way, when I called out Gmail and you see the little buttons. Those are actions embedded in emails to say, what action do I hope someone takes on it? Okay, I'm going to keep going from here, and I'm going to do a time check. I'm okay. I'm going to breeze through this. This is really for developers, like developing a custom solution for your organization. To develop a customized organization-specific solution using this module, you need to learn more about, the default settings, APIs, and the starter kit. And I want to emphasize there's a lot of submodules. They all ship with reasonable defaults, so you don't need to go tweaking them, but it's worth it if you're really investing the time to go in and understand how they're working. And I'm going to just breeze through settings in the sense of, that's the last tab here, and I'll make this bigger again. There's a lot of settings. They're very well organized, which means each details element is broken down from, it's a submodule that's adding settings. So for description, the schema.org description module, these are overrides to descriptions from schema.org. I made little tweaks. Sometimes they were too specific from schema.org, so I wanted to make them more general. The example, even the development, when I'm filling in that form, these are the settings used to generate to tweak develop settings, to set the correct word count and things like that. More importantly, I'm going to go to types. Little adjustments to schema.org types. Like, I don't think you need a content type called FAQ page. You can just call it FAQ, so it makes that adjustment. This is important because this is the defaults. These are the default properties, and this, what I'm highlighting, this is really illustrating, it's hierarchical. So for all articles, we'll have a body, headline, and image, but if you're creating a news article, you'll also get the date line added as a property. And that's why you can control all of this out of the box. And then you go to properties, and this first one is, what are the defaults for properties? And let me see if I can find one that's really, okay, this one stands out. I'm going to make it bigger too. Sorry. I was on actor. So schema.org just says actor property. It doesn't say do you have one actor or multiple actors, but let's agree. If you're doing a movie and you're listing actors, you're going to want it to be pluralized, and you're going to want it to have unlimited values. And sometimes this will just help massage data types where you just like additional types should always be a string, if out of the box. And then this is that example, accepted answers should be text long, not a simple text field. Diving into code and being very nice about not going too far. And this is what's going to have to get adjusted because of recipes. But there's still a lot of value in seeing how simple the APIs under the hood are well structured, where that organization starter kit, this over here, I'm going to try to make it bigger. All of this is boilerplate code. Ignore it for now. All that's happening, that organization tree that was created, is using this YAML file. And this YAML file, which we'll get to config actions, is basically saying, create me a person. Oh, and I'll make this bigger. All right. Create me a person. I really need you to do the member of and contact point property. Take the default ones, but I need those turned on. And then for the organization, these are the 4 relationships I must have. And then for a job posting, it's just going in and hire organization is an entity reference. And I'm pretty sure job posting for hiring organization could be a person or an organization, and that doesn't make sense. So we're going in and just saying, focus on organization schema.org types. I want to emphasize the power of that. We're saying organization, that's anything below an organization. So our entity references actually understand inheritance, meaning if you create a hospital, that's an organization, hence a job posting could be associated with a hospital, and that's all dynamic happening underneath the hood. I skipped over APIs, and one of the perks, and I mean, Core does this well too, it's like, if you break things down into small things, your APIs get really refined. And I'm only going to call out this API, but every aspect of the process when I hit create can be hooked into. This hook, which it's kind of hard to provide example code, but it's hooking into a property being mapped and created. And it's a catch-all. It's saying it's going to the schema.org type, the property. Here's the field storage value. Here's the field config values. Here's the form widget ID, the form widget settings, the display ID, and the display settings. So you can kind of make little tweaks along the way. Okay. I'm going to wrap up. This first one is probably my biggest takeaway, because even if you don't use this module, I really think the lesson here is use schema.org when you're building content models. I haven't had anyone win the argument that there's some other better spec or I should do it my own way. This project was inspired by someone else, not in Drupal, talking about this. So they were doing a project and said, yeah, we use schema.org for all our APIs. And that's what inspired me to do the project. You should definitely take the module for a spin. It generates content. And I didn't emphasize this, but I think it's important. It generates content types. That means you're not really committed to the module. It's generating configuration, and then you could turn it off if you really wanted to. You can even, if you and by the way, this is a great example. If you don't want schema underscore as a field prefix, you can change that. You can turn that off. You can change it back to field. But if you're really getting into this and you want to take this type of approach, you're going to have to play with the APIs, starter kits, to build out a comprehensive architecture. And yeah, I'm just going to reiterate, take a schema.org first approach, decide how to use or not use the schema.org Blueprints module, and just don't look back, look forward. Really start thinking about the future. All right, love thy CMS. I'm calling out the contribution sprints. We're winding down, so everything's today. And you can provide feedback off that QR code, and I will take some questions. And we have 5 minutes for questions?
Amazing time. Yeah, you have 5 minutes.
Yep. See, I told you.
Yeah, you're here.
Thanks.